What's up? I'm Drew Paul Bell, and the other day I was watching a video. It was a discussion between Michael Graves and Peter Eisenman, and I'm gonna link up to that video up here. They were kind of at like a lecture hall kind of a situation, and near the end of the talk, they were taking questions from the audience, and one of the audience members asked. She goes, "We learned earlier today about pedagogy, and I was wondering if you could talk about your educational process." And Michael Graves said, all right, so first though, before I get into that, I want to talk about that word pedagogy. And this is a word that I heard a lot when I was in college. And we learned it was kind of like the study of like how people learn stuff. And basically when I eventually came across it in a book though, called The Education of Millionaires by Michael Ellsberg. And in it, he outlined pedagogy, described what it means. And pedagogy, all right, so the prefix peda is the same prefix from the word pediatrics, like children's doctors, and pedophile. Peda means children. Gogy means like to lead, okay? So it means child leading. It means like to teach people as if they're children. I take a real issue with this as being a method for teaching people in architecture school because there's an alternative to this, and it's called androgogy. Andro is the Greek word for manly, and it means man leading. It means leading somebody like an adult. So what is the difference between this, right? To lead somebody like a kid, how's a kid led around? Well, a kid like doesn't understand anything else, right? So the kid has to kind of follow directions and rules because I said so. Or they're not really given a reason. They're made up reasons for why they have to learn something. And it's almost as if in a school situation, they're learning in this sort of like synthetic, constructed obstacle course that is kind of devoid of real life. In all of school is like this, by the way. It's not just architecture school. Ever since kindergarten, grade school, they were leading everybody like children, and it's like they construct this world and you have to get good grades because we said so. And there's no tangible, real consequence other than because you have to have these grades that we made up and we said that they mean something because we said that they mean something. But to learn like an adult is to be rooted in the world and to actually deal with real consequences. An adult leads by having failures and trying something and it not working and trying something else, but it's problem oriented, right? So there's a real problem that you're trying to solve. And in trying to solve this problem, you might fail a few times, but eventually you'll get it figured out. And because it's real and because it's tangible and you know why you're doing it, that person who's an adult can learn how to do something. So this contrasted with pedagogy. Pedagogy is like is leading people like they're children and making them learn things that they don't feel like are relevant necessarily. Maybe they understand why it's relevant, maybe they don't, but it doesn't matter, they have to learn it anyway. That whole thing, I have a little bit of a disagreement with that. And all right, so getting back to Michael Graves' response to that question, it really resonated with my own experience. And to me, it is similar to kind of this difference, right? He kind of leaned back and he said, well, my education in school was non-existent. He said, they didn't teach us architecture, they taught us design. And he meant that in a way to say that it was almost more like art class. He said, we learned how to align things, but we didn't learn architecture. And looking back at my own architectural education, I learned a lot and it was pretty beneficial, but I think that it felt like art class. It felt like it was an art class where the medium we used was architecture. The medium we used was drawings of buildings. But I've talked about this before. I felt like we learned about the idea of architecture instead of learning actual architecture. And so that resonated with me. What he said, I felt like I had a similar experience. And then he talked about how he went to graduate school at Harvard and he had this book open. He was studying this other building, and his studio professor came up and said, you don't need that, and closed it. He said that you don't need to learn from precedents, you don't need to learn from existing buildings. And he ended up learning, he said he really found people who knew what they were talking about when he went to go study in Rome. Now, this is going to bring me back to another quote that I've heard before, one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's by Mark Twain. He said, "I've never let schooling get in the way of my education." He said, "I never let schooling get in the way of my education." And if you think about it, that's exactly what Michael Graves did. Michael Graves didn't let schooling get, he learned stuff on his own. It wasn't that he expected school to teach him that thing. Well, I mean, maybe he expected it, but he took control of it anyway. He took responsibility for his own education. And this is sort of the advice that I have for you. Okay, so like, yeah, we've distinguished the difference between pedagogy and androgogy. You can talk about how one is better than the other, and you could totally go to your teachers and complain about how this is stupid, you shouldn't be doing this, but in reality, like, you have two options, right? It's not really fair. You can sit around and complain about it and yell at people, and probably they're not going to change. Or you can like take responsibility for learning it anyway. Because to learn something like an adult, you need to have responsibility, and responsibility isn't given, it's taken. So for you to decide that you're going to become a great architect, a standout architect, and more than just above average, then you have to take responsibility and learn, not let schooling get in the way of your education, and learn what you have to learn on your own from an adult type mindset. And that might mean that I compare school sometimes like an obstacle course, where it's like someone had constructed this stuff. It's not real. It's not an actual problem. It's not an actual client, and it's not an actual design situation, but it's been made up. So it's like an obstacle course that somebody built out in the middle of a field. It's not like these are real obstacles, but they were constructed by somebody. If you're in this obstacle course, you're somewhere along the kind of this trail of obstacles, then you still have the opportunity, even though it's synthetic and someone made it up, you still have the opportunity to take control of your own process through that. Even within a pedagogical format, you still have the opportunity to take responsibility for the things that you're going to learn in that pedagogical format. You can still look for things to discern. You can still look for bits of knowledge to glean out of the experiences that you have to participate in to get that degree, to get your credit, to get your license. And there's something that is doable there, right? So even though it's easy to complain about it, the point about making this distinction isn't so that you can make yourself a victim and complain that, oh, I'm in a pedagogical structure and my teacher shouldn't do this to me. I would argue they probably shouldn't, and there should be a better way of doing this, right? There should be a more androgogical approach to learning architecture, because this is something done by adults. This isn't something done by kids. And by the time you're in college and you're over the age of 18, when we're expecting you to make a decision for the rest of your future, then you should be treated like an adult. And you shouldn't, if you're going to have loans handed to you and held to you like an adult that you can't get out of, then you need to be led through school like an adult and not like a child. And that's my belief, that's my opinion. But complaining about it, I don't know how much good that's going to do. I mean, maybe you can change something, but the surefire way, whether you can change something or not, you need to take control of your own education. And you can do that by watching interviews with 2 star architects who have accomplished a great deal in their career. You can do that by finding mentors in your local AIA chapter and talking to them about architecture. You can do that through internships and through working on real jobs. And you can do that through watching YouTube videos and talking with your friends about their experiences, right? There's plenty of ways to take responsibility. So understand this difference between pedagogy and androgogy, because it's interesting, and then use that distinction to then take control and take responsibility for your own education, and never let schooling get in the way of your education. All right, so I hope this helped. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.